The scripture this morning is from the Nisadya Sukta from the Rig Veda. There was neither non-existence nor existence then, neither the realm of space nor the sky which is beyond. What stirred? Where? In whose protection? There was neither death nor immortality then, no distinguishing sign of night nor of day. That one breathed, windless by its own impulse. Other than that, there was nothing beyond. Darkness there was at first, by darkness hidden, without distinctive marks. This all was water. That which, becoming by the void, was covered, that one, by force of heat, came into being. Who really knows? Who will here proclaim it? Whence was it produced? Whence is its creation? Gods came afterwards with the creation of this universe. Who then knows whence it has arisen? Whether God's will created it or whether he was mute? Perhaps it formed itself, or perhaps it did not. The supreme Brahman of the world, all-pervasive and all-knowing, he indeed knows. If not, no one knows. Now, I was prompted, I could have used Genesis, but I chose the much older, by several centuries, Rig Veda, which means praise knowledge, because I think it better exemplifies how humankind has wrestled with this concept, this notion of in the beginning. You know, now when it comes to wrestling with uncertainty, I'm going to take a giant leap. I don't know if many of you have taken part of the Barbenheimer craze that hit us this summer, but if you've seen the Barbie movie yet, I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but there's a meme that sprung from it. There's a fun moment at the beginning where Ken says to everyone, most people think my job is a lifeguard, but it's not. My job is beach, just beach. Now, this is a conundrum for Ken, and it does actually kind of fuel his adventure for the rest of the movie, trying to figure out my job is just beach and grappling with that and trying to find something he can get his hands around. But last week, when I was on a beach in Guam, I got it. Now, I had just read this essay on Lao Tzu and the Tao, and in the West, we kind of like to conveniently interpret Tao as the way, but it is neither a path nor is it a method. Lao Tzu explains that trying to grasp or get your hands around the Tao is like trying to eat one's own mouth. Now, when I was on this beach in Guam, I found myself with no thoughts with what I'd done earlier that day and no concerns about what I'd do later. The water was neither too cold, the sand was neither too hot, the sun not too bright. The children laughing in the distance were not too loud. I was in this moment, complete and wanted for nothing. That's when it hit me. Well, I likely would not have been reading that essay on Lao Tzu had I not been for Reverend Scott's evocative sermon just a few weeks ago on the Quran and the veil. Now, that veil represents the boundary between what we know and don't know. If you remember, as they say in Latin, O magnum mysterium, O great mystery. What we know, the physical, and don't know, the metaphysical. And how fortunate for us in this church that this boundary is a veil, somewhat penetrable with a keen eye and heart, and movable, not a wall, not fixed, not impenetrable. Now, for as long as we humans have had self-awareness and eyes to look up, we've wondered, where did this all come from? And how did it begin? And more recently in human history, what's our place in it? Not just on this planet, but among its unfathomable vastness. Now, in this church, we know we can retreat to that inner sacred space and listen for that small, still voice. And we know, we feel how connected we are to loved ones in spirit. Yet to me, when I consider O Magnum Mysterium, it's like peering through a pinhole in the veil. Now, philosopher Alan Watts likened the spiritual experience to a musical one, describing those who sit, hear each note, and collect it into what will become a greater, more beautiful whole. Then there are those who receive each note into the body and begin to move accordingly. And as with music, he says, both are necessary for the complete spiritual experience. We understand divine law, divine nature, especially as it pertains to us individually. But then we must begin to move with it. In essence, we become spirit in action, creating a greater, more beautiful whole. A Colorado-based psychotherapist, Michael Gay, who I've followed a little bit, he's a wilderness therapy expert, and he uses it to treat trauma and PTSD. He mused on a podcast during the COVID era that not too long ago in Western civilization, the barrier between us and the spirit grew denser when we stopped dancing as a culture. Now, David Bowie and Mick Jagger may have sung about it, but let's face it, there's not much dancing in the street these days. We don't even dance on weekends that much anymore, just special occasions. But I think Michael Gay's point is that when we stopped moving collectively, consciously, with intention, we started to lose sight of all the ways we move in unseen, unconscious ways. And when I consider how we've lost our connection to the greater creation, I can't overlook how the greater human dance has ground to a halt. We used to move long, long ago around the continent with the animals in time to the seasons. Then we began to harvest with the seasons. And thanks to train and cargo ships, we eventually didn't even have to eat in sync with Mother Earth. And until recently, love it or hate it, millions of us rose early in the morning and undertook a choreography in cars, buses, and trains to work and then back again. Now, my cynical intellect asks, come on, what does movement, my action, or my lack thereof have to do with my connection to the entirety of creation, much less the other side of the veil? I'm not some early mammoth hunter. I'm not even Pa Ingalls in my little house on the prairie living from harvest to harvest. But consciously or not, intentionally or not, we are all in motion. And I'm not just talking about how everything is in vibration, according to quantum physics, or that old metaphysical treatise, the Kabbalion. I'm talking about a larger scale this time. Well, several years ago, I heard astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson describe how our solar system was born from a supernova. Now, he explained it's broadly hypothesized and accepted that our tiny corner of the Milky Way was occupied by clouds of hydrogen and helium and interstellar dust just hanging around. Till about 4.5 billion years ago, when a nearby star went supernova. And the theory and the belief is that the power of that supernova set these clouds, these inert clouds, into motion. The shock wave disrupted these complacent clouds, spinning them into motion. Gravity bunched and sorted things, which coalesced into a disk. And from that eventually arose the sun and planets. Now, this didn't really mean too much beyond a scientific, factoid when I heard him say it, even when he summed it up with this speech. Not only are we in the universe is in us. I don't know of any deeper spiritual feeling than that, which brings that upon me. But this summer I was reading a book by mathematical cosmologist Dr. Brian Jones called The Universe is a Green Dragon. It's a nonsensical title, don't try to wrap your head around it. But in this book, he took that premise that all of these elements, all of the building blocks that comprise this predate us. They are literally universal. And he made a bold but logical assertion. Again, you've already heard it and you've already read it in the bulletin. We are the universe aware of itself. Now, getting more specific, having arisen from this planet Earth, we, as best we can tell, are the first aspect of Earth to be aware of itself. And yet, when it comes to our connection to the whole, we struggle beyond the sense of a fingernail of this entire cosmic body. Now, despite this, Dr. Swim points out 3 cosmological laws that we as people beautifully, if not unwittingly, follow. And I alluded to them earlier. Attraction, coalescence, and evocation. In the case of our sun, attraction, or cosmologically gravity, brought hydrogen and helium together, which coalesced into a star and evoked light. Another example, hydrogen and oxygen came together, which became oceans, which through additional instances of coalescence became a complex environment for all sorts of life. Attraction. We as people, we have some sense of what attracts us to certain things, but what keeps us hanging around their orbit? Eventually, 2, a dozen, hundreds, thousands of us coalesce into something bigger and evoke something greater than the sum of our parts. And this can be done with positive intentions or negative intentions, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. I couldn't help but consider Schwimm's proposition through a metaphysical lens, especially when I consider how much of our philosophy here in this church relies on the tenet of co-creation and the law of attraction. Through attraction, coalescence, and evocation, we move just everything else. We move through attraction, coalescence, and evocation, we move among everything else in the whole of creation. Now, I can't speak for clouds of interstellar gas or molecules, but I'm aware of what I'm attracted to and what I attract. I am responsible for what I co-create and how it resonates through the world and time. And in this way, I fulfill my role as the universe aware of itself and aware of my subsequent responsibility. Now, did the writers of the New Testament know we were the stuff of stars when they told us to never forget we were children of the light? There's a song about this from the native Passamaquoddy tribe that goes, "We are the stars which sing. We sing with our light. We are the birds of fire. We fly over the heaven. Our light is a star. We sing on the road of the spirits, the road of the Great Spirit." On the final pages of Schwimm's book, he offhandedly mentioned that scientists have known for over a century that the neurons in our brains produce photons. Yes, photons, the quantum particle of light. And while they still don't know what to make of this, reading that at about 1:30 in the morning blew my mind. And you can imagine, as I was drifting off to sleep shortly after closing that book, that made drifting off to sleep, to put it mildly, challenging. In some ways, I felt like I had just planted 2 entire feet beyond the veil. Or perhaps it's that veil's ephemeral fabric simply just shifted, just in the way as it did when early seafarers realized that they weren't going to fall off the horizon, or when the Vatican ultimately accepted Copernicus and Galileo. Yet I was still left with questions like those in the Rig Veda. What stirred, where, in whose protection? Who really knows? Now, as Lao Tzu said of the Tao, yearning for it, trying to understand it or quantify it, is not the way to the Tao. And the Buddha cautioned that desiring enlightenment is the antithesis of attaining enlightenment. And this is what came somewhat in focus on Guam in that elusive moment. I was beach. Now, if we are indeed the universe aware of itself, we remain wholly subject to its greater movement and flow. Our faith is no exception to that. Like music, the metaphysical language of our faith is assembled note by note, insight by insight, for a greater, more beautiful whole. But then it must be set into motion. And this is one of the reasons why Siddhartha, who became Buddha eventually, left the samanas who preferred to live in isolation. And this is why some itinerant rabbi named Jesus raised so many eyebrows with his ministry that, as we know, followed the law of attraction, coalescence, and the ultimate evocation. And we've gathered here each Sunday for a deeper understanding. We've coalesced in this church. We've coalesced in this congregation for the moment. Children of light, I encourage you to let our every step out of this door, and until we meet again, let those steps evoke faith in motion.